The call light had been blinking for 11 minutes when Nurse Opal Denning finally pushed open the door to room 4C and found Harold Sutter with his IV line tangled around his wrist and his face the color of old chalk. She didn't call for help right away. She assessed first. That was the training. That was the reflex. And what she assessed was that his breathing was wrong, too shallow, too fast, and that the pulse ox on his finger read 81 and dropping. Mr. Sutter. She touched his shoulder. Can you hear me? He opened his eyes. Not all the way. She hit the call button on the wall with the heel of her hand and reached for the oxygen mask at the same time. By the time she had it positioned, the number had dropped to 78. I need a crash cart in 4C, she said when someone picked up at the desk, and I need Dr. Anand. Now. What she did not know, standing there with her fingers on Harold Sutter's wrist and her eyes on the monitor, was that 40 feet down the hall in the administrative conference room that smelled like fresh paint and catered sandwiches, the chief operating officer of Callaway Regional Medical Center was showing a group of 6 private equity partners a color-coded slide about patient flow efficiency. She didn't know that yet. What she knew was that Harold Sutter was 71 years old, post-op day 2 from a hip replacement, and that his oxygen saturation should not be 76. Dr. Anand arrived in under 2 minutes. He was good that way, quick, quiet, no wasted motion. He took one look at the monitor, one look at Sutter, and said, "P, let's move." They moved. Opal drew blood while the respiratory tech adjusted the oxygen. Dr. Anand ordered the CT pay and the heparin drip and was already on the phone with radiology when the door opened and Marcus Fell walked in. Opal had seen Marcus Fell exactly 4 times in the 8 months she'd worked at Callaway Regional. He was the COO. He wore suits that cost more than her rent and had the kind of stillness that powerful people sometimes cultivated, the calm but actually read as the absence of concern. He looked at Harold Sutter, he looked at the IV line and the oxygen mask and the monitor with its alarming numbers, and then he looked at Opal. "We have a situation," he said, not to Dr. Anand, to her. "Yes," she said, "we do. His SAT is 76. We think pulmonary embolism. I understand that." He stepped further into the room and something about the way he moved, precise, deliberate, made the hair on Opal's arms stand up. "What I'm saying is that we also have a situation. Our investors are here today, the partners from Meridian Capital. They're doing a full walkthrough." Dr. Anand didn't look up from the chart. "That's not really our concern right now." "It will be," Fell said, "if they see a code situation in progress on the 3rd floor when we told them Q3 outcomes were trending positive." The room went very quiet. Opal looked at the monitor. Then she looked at Marcus Fell. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm asking if there's a way to stabilize him and move him to a less visible unit before the tour reaches this wing." She thought she might have misheard him. She ran it back in her head, the exact words, and she hadn't. "He is not stable," she said. "He has a suspected pulmonary embolism. Moving him right now could kill him. I understand the clinical picture. I don't think you do, Mr. Fell." Something shifted in his face. Not anger exactly. Something more like the adjustment a person makes when a variable behaves unexpectedly. "Nurse Denning, I'm not asking you to discontinue care. I'm asking you to consider whether the optics of this particular room at this particular moment." "The optics," Dr. Anand said. He said it the way you repeat something when you want to make sure you heard it correctly. "The optics," Fell said without flinching, "of an apparent emergency in a patient room directly adjacent to the tour route could have implications for the capital investment we've been working toward for 18 months. I'm asking you to think about the bigger picture." Opal finished hanging the heparin drip. She checked the rate. She adjusted the oxygen mask on Harold Sutter's face, and he opened his eyes again and looked at her, and she said, "You're okay, we've got you." Then she looked around. "The bigger picture," she said, "is that this man had a pulmonary embolism 2 days after a surgery performed in this hospital. The bigger picture is that his oxygen is at 74 and we are treating him. That is all that is happening in this room right now." Fell looked at her for a long moment. "I'd like you to come with me into the hall." "I'm not going into the hall, Nurse Denning. I am not leaving this patient." He left. Dr. Anand caught her eye across the bed. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The CT confirmed massive bilateral pulmonary embolism. They transferred Harold Sutter to the ICU 40 minutes later, once he was stable enough to move, once the heparin was running correctly and his SAT had climbed back to 91. Opal walked alongside the gurney to the elevator and handed off to the ICU charge nurse herself, gave the full report, stayed until she was sure everything had transferred correctly. She was charting at the nurse's station when Sandra from HR came to find her. "He wants to meet with you," Sandra said. She had the look of someone delivering a message they didn't write and didn't endorse. "When?" "Now." The administrative wing was quieter than the floor. The carpet was different, thicker, newer, and the lighting was warmer, the kind that was designed to feel less institutional. Fell's office was at the end of the hall, and when Opal walked in, he was standing at the window with his back to her. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He turned around. The investors were gone. The catered sandwiches had been cleared away. He looked tired in a way that made him look slightly more human. You embarrassed this hospital today, he said. She had prepared herself for a lot of things. That particular phrasing wasn't one of them. I kept a patient alive. You undermined a relationship that this institution has been building for a year and a half. Meridian Capital does not invest in hospitals that look like they're in chaos. We weren't in chaos. We were treating a pulmonary embolism. You contradicted a senior administrator in front of a patient. You asked me to move a dying man for optics. I asked you, Fell said, and his voice had gone very even, to exercise professional judgment about timing and context. Professional judgment, Opal said, is exactly what I exercised. The silence that followed was the kind that meant something was being decided. I'm placing you on administrative leave, Fell said, pending a review of today's conduct. She had known it was coming. She had known it from the moment she said, I am not leaving this patient. She had known it the way you know a storm is coming. You can feel it in the pressure of the air before you can see any clouds. Okay, she said. You'll need to surrender your badge to Sandra on your way out. Okay. This doesn't have to be permanent, he said, and she thought he might even believe that. Once the review is complete, Mr. Fell. She picked up her bag from the chair where she'd set it. Harold Sutter is alive right now. His family is with him. His oxygen is at 94 and climbing. Whatever happens to me in this review, that part is done. That part worked out. She gave Sandra her badge on the way out. The parking lot was cold and bright, the kind of January afternoon where the sun is fully out and does absolutely nothing for the temperature. She sat in her car for a while without starting it. Her phone had 4 texts from colleagues she'd worked with for 8 months. 3 of them said some version of "we heard what happened." One of them, from her friend Claudette, who had been a nurse for 22 years and had seen things, said, "You did right, now protect yourself." She started the car. Harold Sutter's daughter was named Vivian, and Vivian Sutter was not the kind of person you overlook twice. She arrived at the hospital that evening, flew in from Chicago, and by the following morning she had spoken to the ICU attending, the patient advocate, the risk management office, and a hospital administrator who was not Marcus Fell. By noon she had a clear picture of what had happened, because 3 nurses told her, separately and without coordination, the same story. Opal didn't know any of this while it was happening. She was at home, making coffee, trying to figure out what to do with a Tuesday that was supposed to be a work day. She had called her union rep. She had left a message with an attorney whose name Claudette had given her. She had written down everything she remembered from the conversation in Fell's office, while the details were still clean and exact in her mind. Her phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. Unknown number. Is this Opal Denning? It is. My name is Vivian Sutter. My father is Harold Sutter. He's in your ICU. Opal sat down. How is he doing? Better. They think he'll recover fully. A pause. I wanted to thank you. The nurses told me what you did, what you refused to do. I was doing my job. That's what all 3 of them said you'd say. There was something that might have been a short laugh. Mrs. Denning, I don't want to overstep, but I want you to know that my father, before he retired, spent 30 years as a federal inspector. Office of Inspector General, Department of Health and Human Services. Opal didn't say anything. He's not in a position to make calls right now, Vivian said. But I am, and I've already made a few. The investigator arrived on Thursday. His name was Greer, and he had the manner of someone who had spent a long time listening to people and had gotten very good at it without necessarily enjoying it. He met first with the hospital's legal team, then with the administrator who wasn't Fell, then with a series of nursing staff who had been on the floor that afternoon. Opal met with him on Friday morning in a conference room that was not the administrative wing, with her union rep beside her and her written account of events on the table. She told him everything. The oxygen saturation dropping, Fell's words as precisely as she remembered them, the optics of this particular room at this particular moment, the request to move an unstable patient, her refusal, the administrative leave. Greer listened. He wrote things down. When she finished, he said, "Would moving Mr. Sutter at that time have posed a serious risk to his health? Yes. Moving a patient with active bilateral pulmonary embolism before anticoagulation is fully established significantly increases mortality risk. And Mr. Fell understood that?" Dr. Anand told him. I told him. He said he understood the clinical picture. Greer nodded slowly, and he asked you to do it anyway. He asked us to consider it. Did the consideration have a recommended outcome? Opal looked at him. He said moving the patient would avoid optics that could affect an 18-month capital investment. That's not a neutral suggestion. Greer wrote something down. No, he said, it's not. The findings took 11 days. Opal spent most of them doing the things that people do when their routines have been disrupted, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, calling people she'd been meaning to call, going to the gym at hours when the gym was mostly empty. She slept badly. She didn't regret anything, but that didn't mean the waiting was easy. On day 9, she heard through Claudette that Marcus Fell had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. On day 10, the hospital's board issued a statement acknowledging that a review was underway. On day 11, her attorney called. The OIG findings are in, he said. And there's someone who wants to talk to you. The someone was Dr. Patricia Wren, chair of the hospital's board of directors. They met in a different conference room, one with better lighting, and a view of the parking structure that was somehow still nicer than the administrative wing's conference room. Dr. Wren was in her 60s, small, with the manner of someone who had learned a long time ago that the most efficient way to deal with a problem was to be direct about it. The investigation found evidence of a pattern, she said, not just the incident with your patient. Other instances where care decisions were influenced by, or at least considered in the context of investor perception. Mr. Fell was not the only person involved, though he was the most direct. Opal listened. The board has accepted Mr. Fell's resignation. We've also initiated a comprehensive review of our administrative protocols for investor engagement to ensure those interactions are fully separated from clinical operations. She folded her hands on the table. We'd like to offer you your position back, with a formal apology from the institution. And we'd like to discuss a role on the Clinical Oversight Committee that will be part of our reform process. Opal looked out at the parking structure for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. The 3 nurses who talked to Vivian Sutter, are they still employed here? Dr. Wren's expression didn't change. Yes. And Dr. Anand? Yes. And there won't be retaliation. Not now, not 6 months from now, not disguised as a performance review. I can tell you that whistleblower protections will be formally codified into HR policy as part of this reform process. I can tell you that the board is committed to that, not just as a statement, but as a structural change. A pause. I can't give you certainty about the future. I don't think you'd believe me if I tried. Opal thought that was the most honest thing anyone in an administrative capacity had said to her in a long time. The Oversight Committee, she said. What would my role actually be? Reviewing case escalation protocols, identifying gaps between administrative decision-making and clinical reality, flagging anything that looks like what happened with Mr. Sutter before it gets that far. That's a real job. Opal was quiet for a moment. She thought about Harold Sutter's oxygen saturation reading 76 on a Monday afternoon. She thought about the exact weight of the call to move him, the way Fell had framed it, not as an order, but as a consideration, careful and deniable. She thought about the way that language worked, how the things that were most wrong were sometimes the most quietly phrased. I'll take the position back, she said. And I'll join the committee, but I want something in writing that specifies the committee has independent reporting authority to the board, not through the COO's office, not through administration, direct. Dr. Wren looked at her for a long moment. That's a reasonable ask. It's a necessary one. I'll have counsel draft it. Good. Opal pushed her chair back. When does the committee start? Harold Sutter went home on a Tuesday 3 weeks after he'd arrived. His oxygen was at 97. He was on anticoagulants and strict follow-up, and Vivienne was flying back with him to help with the first few weeks, though he had already told the discharge nurse with some force that he was perfectly capable of managing his own medications. Opal wasn't on shift when he left. She was in a meeting, a working meeting, the first session of the Clinical Oversight Committee, in a room with a whiteboard and paper coffee cups, and 6 people who had all seen the inside of a hospital from the working side of it. Claudette was there, Dr. Anand was there. A pharmacist named Reyes Burkett, who had been flagging inventory anomalies for 2 years and had never had anyone listen. A patient advocate who had the particular exhausted look of someone who had been saying the right things into a void for a long time. Dr. Wren stopped by at the beginning to say something brief and then left them to it, which was the right instinct. Opal looked around the table. Okay, she said. Let's start with what we know, not what we hope or what the policy says. What we actually know happens in this building and who it affects. Reyes Burkett uncapped her marker and went to the whiteboard. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty. The administrative wing was being reorganized, new policies being drafted in offices where the catered sandwiches used to be. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, a call light was blinking in room 4C, and a nurse was already walking toward it, moving the way good nurses always move. Not running, not hurrying in a way that scared patients, but with the particular deliberate speed of someone who understood that some things could not wait, and some things could not be undone, and the difference between them was everything.